Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Davidson, and I'm the founding director of the Futures Initiative here at the Graduate Center. And welcoming you here to our spring symposium. Did I say spring? Can't this year be over yet? I know, our fall symposium. Thank you all for coming. I want to say a few words about what this symposium is about, what the Futures Initiative is about, and then I'm going to turn it over to the different sessions that we're sponsoring today, each one from a different class. When you came in, you were given a little sheet. And on the sheet, we would like you to, I think I'm doing this correctly, to have everybody quickly fill out, very, very quickly, and turn into, to Raven. Just answer the question, what do you consider to be the most pressing question related to inclusion in higher education? Very, very quickly. Your idea is we're going to be, you don't have to sign this, we're going to be writing those into, I believe, an open Google Doc, and that's going to be partly the subject of our last session today, one conducted by the Futures Initiative Fellows. So you can either do that now or wait a few moments, but Raven will be coming around in a few minutes to collect those. So the Futures Initiative is dedicated to two things, and they're both innovation and equity in higher education. And the reason those two go together is typically it's schools like MIT and Stanford that get to be called innovative, and somehow the inclusiveness and the equity gets left out. And we believe the most innovative thinking about higher education has to be egalitarian, has to have equity figured into the mix, has to have some kind of social justice aspect and contribution to society, especially for public education, but it should be for all of higher education. If it isn't, then higher education is just yet another engine of economic and social immobility instead of mobility, and inequality instead of equality. The classes that we teach are partly aimed at looking at the structure of CUNY and the Graduate Center. So the classes always include one central line CUNY Graduate Center faculty member co-teaching with somebody from throughout the CUNY schools. There's always some kind of inclusiveness, some kind of social justice, some kind of interdisciplinarity built into the classes, and we hope and like to feature some kind of interactive student-centered or public form of pedagogy as well. And we'll be talking about that all throughout today and what that means. As it worked out this semester, partly because somebody who was on maternity leave, we have a kind of a interesting breakdown where this semester inclusion is about the psychology of care and environmentalism. It includes ability and disability. And next semester, we're featuring 4 courses that all overtly focus on race and inclusivity and race. That wasn't intended that way. It just, as I said, happened that way because of somebody being on maternity leave. But in fact, thank you. Our spring symposium is going to be on race across the curriculum. I'm going to turn it over now to the next speaker. Today is, like everything we do in the Futures Initiative, is run by graduate students, by our fellows, and by students in the classes. I think that's extremely important, and I want to underscore that, since so much about graduate education is designed very, very hierarchically and often to infantilize graduate students. And in fact, the whole profession is designed, I have a whole lecture on this, I'm not going to go into this, but it's designed really as a very hierarchical profession designed to infantilize people basically until there's tenure, even though right now only 20% of people in higher education get tenure. So it's a kind of a perpetual infantilization, not just a problem of higher education, but of society in general, which is another one of the issues that we look at in the Futures Initiative. But now I'm going to turn things over to Soo-Jung Kim, our postdoctoral fellow.
Hello everyone, I'm Soo-Jung Kim. I'm a postdoctoral fellow of the Futures Initiative, and then I'm so pleased to introduce you Dr. David Chaffin and then Dr. Tomo Imaichi and their students, Benita Nehru, Shinner, Okafor, and Shana very little. And then they're kind of Dr. David and then Tomo have been collaborating together in designing and then teaching a very interesting class titled the Environmental Psychology of Care. And then Dr. David Chapin is a faculty member of the Department of Environmental Psychology here at Graduate Center. And then Dr. Toma Imamichi is a faculty member at the LaGuardia Community College, and then he is in Social Science Division. And then as David, Toma, and then Benita, Shneur, and Shana will further discuss, the environmental psychology course utilize an interdisciplinary approach, examining the interlinks between the psychological, physical environment and care. And then the course explore, how physical environment, reflect care, and then how we can create more caring, physical environment. So I will introduce David, Tomo, and their students. Please welcome.
They're full of wires, by the way. There's some tricky ones.
I want to thank the Futures Institute sincerely for creating this opportunity. For me, it's been really wonderful working on a topic that would not ordinarily be something we could work on. And I just want to add that Tomo has just been tenured. He's one of those who's made it. But so I'll turn it over to Tomo.
I would like to echo the thank yous that David just gave, and I'm sure that the opportunity at the Futures Initiative had some role in the tenure decision. So today, in the presentation on the course Environmental Psychology of Care, we wanted to feature some of what our students have been doing. Throughout the semester, we gave different assignments, and today we're going to present you with some of what the students did. Care can mean a lot of different things, and so we have one presentation on the assignment that pertains to words associated with care. Then we move to images associated with care, and possibly also anti-care. And finally, we will also explore some places that will reflect care/anti-care. Okay, maybe I should get this ready. Then I just have to find this.
I think several of our students are themselves teachers.
Yes.
I should point out. So the word student is not infantilizing.
So first we have Shana talk about words associated with care.
Yeah, thank you, Tomo. So just to echo what has already been expressed about our class, that we were really taking the opportunity to examine inclusion and exclusion through the lens of care. Who's receiving care, who's not receiving care, how do we ask for care, how do we embody care? And as Tomo mentioned, one of our exercises was to actually reach out to our immediate spheres of connection, the people that we see day in and day out, and ask them, well, what do you think of when you hear the word care? I had cataloged some of the responses that initially came up. And they were pretty fascinating. I'm sure that as you are just hearing that question, you might already be thinking about what you think of when you hear the word care. And very often we had these really repeated, very poetic conceptions of care. Things like care is understanding, care is love, care is profession, it is teachers, it is nurses, care is a hug, care is listening. And when I had asked people to probe a little bit farther, okay, well, what is listening to you? How does listening actually show you care? Or what is love? What is love for you? Why does love show you care? It became really difficult for people to actually put it into words, to actually put specific actions or examples to the idea of care, that maybe we think about it in such an abstract way that even when finding the words to describe it proved fairly difficult. So it was interesting. It was kind of like this resistance to actually pinning down care. And then I also had a few other responses that saw care as not necessarily positive. There was a friend of mine who reached out to me privately who said, you know, I was afraid I didn't want to bring the thread down. I didn't want to bring down everybody's positivity about care. But for me, the first thing I thought of was exhausting. Care is exhausting. And I thought that was incredibly poignant and insightful, and yet maybe something that we also don't always think of as encompassing care. What is it to receive care, but what is it to give care? Can that also be exhausting? And then additionally, I had a friend who was a cancer survivor, and her experience in undergoing and dealing with treatments involving her cancer really framed care in a very, very active way. That for her it wasn't these abstract ideals of love and support and understanding, but she said initially it was intentional service, i.e. delivering meals, cleaning someone's house, taking out an ailing neighbor's trash. My cancer journey strongly informs this reaction. It is just not helpful for people to say, let me know what I can do to help. But this idea of care is active. And maybe that was another way in which we struggle to put words to care, because it is expressed more through action. But that will encompass my response, yeah.
Thank you. Sure. So next we have Shinara. She has several images, so I'll pull them out in order.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Muriel Cathor. I go by she, her, her pronouns. So in this course, I think we really not only push ourselves to think about the definition of care, but I think what was really amazing about this was that we also got to push about what exactly care looked like. So we even had assignments that asked us, like, what are images when you think of care? What kind of things do you see? What do you see in your daily environments? And what do you see within, like, your relationships with other people? So I'm a millennial and I have my notes on my phone. But I'm going to bring up a little bit about the words of care that came to mind for those that also did an informal interview. And some of the things that Shana brought up was actually similar to what I heard from families and friends. And most specifically that came up from my mom when I asked the question was concern, love, giving, sacrifice, and respect. And then when I asked someone else, the same words were nurture, guide, love, affection, sympathy, empathy, and support. So there was like a trend of almost like affect and emotion within the responses that for me, like really grounded my understanding of care having to be dealt with like empathy. And when we were given the assignment of what it looked like, I had to really sit for a while to think about like how does empathy show up within spaces and how does empathy show up in like our material world. So I have 3 photos. So this is the first photo. And on the assignment, we not only posted photos, but we also posted like titles for each photo. And in this image, this one was titled Care of Black Women. And so this is an image when I was in Brazil this past summer. And this is one woman who was an activist, and this is an older elder in Brazil in the town of Cachoeira. And the ways in which they didn't speak the same language at all, but yet there was this understanding of a kinship that didn't need to be described. And then the first thought when I'm thinking of human relationships is this type of care. And then the second picture, I pushed around for care of spatial aspects as well as spirituality. So care can show up within this realm as well. So this is a photo of an altar. And so when thinking of care, the mindfulness that comes in like setting up a space, that's for spirituality, and the mindfulness that comes when doing it in reverence of others and for others. And then the third photo. And so then that last one I thought of was care for the environment and care for the land. So then basically just pushing the idea of like care showing up in different ways in different realms of the world, but yet there's still like the thread of empathy throughout. These are children in Trinidad, they're working on the farm, and it was just them weeding, but yet there's like so much attention to the detail of weeding, and there's also attention to knowing that there's power in what they were doing and what it was for, which was for food, and which was for the people in their village. So I related some of this stuff that we had, or the stuff with photos, but also to the readings and assignments that we had within class. So speaking as particularly around Merchant's chapter on caring that speaks to birthing in hospitals and the unspoken trauma that a surprisingly large amount of women have, and also the type of care that's needed for intervention and later healing from birthing, and also through the Native American spiritualism, or environmentalism, specifically looking at spirituality and how this push for decolonial thinking around how we relate to our world as man versus the world, but also knowing that we're not separate from it. So I have another photo that I want to show now of anti-care that we really were pushing. And so this was a photo I took just recently in Hell's Kitchen. And I was walking and I saw it and I walked past it, and then I went back because I was like, wait, did that even make sense? And basically just sitting with like how spaces can also provide like anti-care. And so knowing that like that's one entrance into the door, and the counter that there's the flyers referencing is all the way towards the back of the restaurant. There's no button for someone to call, for someone to come forward. So basically thinking of care also expanding into like accessibility for others who have different bodies. So some of my biggest takeaways from the course is what I perceived as like a call to decolonize, as well as a push for ourselves past capitalism and ableism. Push ourselves to really sit with the horrors and evils of racism and sexism, and redefining and redeveloping our relationship to the land and overall environment outside of a modern colonial lens that typically has been part of the dominant narrative and viewpoint.
Thank you. Next we have Benita, who will talk about one of our field trips. We had 2 field trips. One was to the Met, where also care in terms of how people relate to objects. And then, of course, another was to Roosevelt Island. And Benita will talk about the trip to Roosevelt Island.
Yeah, I have one image. Hi, I'm Benita. I was really struck by this building, which I guess is actually the campus and a building. It's the new Cornell building on Roosevelt Island. When we first arrived on the island, David and Tomo took us on a little tour in a circle and told us, I guess, a little bit of background about how the island was used in the past. One of the things that struck me was the mention of polio and psychiatric patients, and that space was previously used to sort of segregate these 2 groups from the greater city environment. So in this case, physical space and emotional space are activated through this island. And then I teach at a community college, and so I'm often thinking about built environment and how built environment and space informs things like identity and belonging and community. And I've been reading about this building for some time, and I was so fascinated to actually get to go and see it with my own eyes, and I think the thing that struck me was how integrated this campus and this building is with the community. I'm not sure if you can see, there are two tiny little strollers there. The first people that I saw on campus were not students, they were, it was a family actually, and a couple of mothers with their tiny children, sort of walking around on the grass. I am really taken by the design. I think it's really very forward thinking, the way that the space is used, the balance between light and grass and trees, and sort of the use of sort of curved spaces rather than sort of jagged edges. But I think particularly the integration between the academic setting and the lived environment. I think it's really interesting how when you have access to a lot of resources, the sky's the limit in terms of design. And I'm constantly thinking about that in the environments that I teach in, when I'm sort of trying to understand my own experience and the student experience and how they develop a sense of scholarly identity, a sense of belonging in a space, and how community develops from that. And I think built environment can really inform that experience, and in many ways tell you whether or not you're welcome.
I have one more image.
Yes, more of the green space.
There's a theme that I found running through almost every one of our sessions and the readings and discussions, and that is, I mean it both physically distance, near and far, and metaphorically distance, near and far. That an aspect of care is bringing close. That which is close to us, well, those we let in as fellow human beings, we treat one way. Those we treat another way. And I think that I want to point out that theme, that it seemed to just raise its lovely presence time after time through the course of the semester. All the colonizing that Shanira is talking about, I think you can think of in terms, or at least partly, of distance. So,
Some final words or something?
well, at some point, we want to turn it over to see if we can get some responses from you all about your thoughts and conceptions and ideas about care, but I just wanted to, I'll throw it back to you, Tomo, if you want to make any more comments.
Yes. So maybe some comments also. I mean, I first would like to also thank our presenters because they did such a great job to sort of and I'm really glad that they were speaking rather than, me, because I don't think I could have done justice to the course. And I think that was actually also, one of the great things about the course, in particular also the vision that was given to us, that these are sort of like our collaborators in exploring a particular topic. And in that respect, there were a lot of new things that emerged, because usually when you start out a course, there are certain things that you have in mind. But then, as you actually engage in the course, there are a lot of new ideas that come to fruition. And so, once again, I would like to thank the Future initiatives for that.
Great. Yeah.
Will you take some questions? Would you mind taking
Yeah, of
questions?
course.
But specifically, it would be interesting to hear ideas about care from you all, if you're willing to kind of go along with us, because we could make a little bit of back and forth dialogue over that.
And particularly, there were also a lot of things that, even though we touched upon, that we also did in the course that we might have not really, touched upon in the presentation. So keep that in mind too.
If anyone wants to chime in, I just want to make sure that you speak on the microphone for our live streaming audience.
Just to break the ice. I love it that you're talking about closeness in care, and so many of the images are about closeness, and then that scary image of you in a wheelchair, go where your wheelchair can't go, or where you can't go to get a chair. I mean, that's such a profound thing. And I'm thinking about it in terms of education too, because so much, often even in the best class, it's often shut off from all the other classes. So your idea of closeness is one of the things that education often does, is makes little circles where we close other people out. So thank you so much for sharing what you did in your class with all of us. It was very, very moving to see those images and to hear about your class. Thank you.
I'm moved by the invitation to even stop and think about care. So I've been in academic medicine for a long time, and for the first time I had to stop and think about health care, right? That's what hospitals say they're doing. Really, it's disease care. It is not health care, trust me. But I work in HIV, and a patient once remarked on how wonderful it was to come to our center and be greeted by hugs. And I thought, well, why is that? So this is a longitudinal study. People are donating their brains. It's a brain bank. So of course, like over time, you develop relationships, and if you're that type, you greet with hugs. But it meant so much to someone with a medical illness that had been shunned away from everybody and everything. So they say, this is the one place I come and I feel welcomed. And I thought, well, I never thought like a hug could be so powerful. So I appreciate, again, this invitation to just sit and think, and then in yours, and I'm not gonna hog this, I'm just inspired. But with racism, the environmental care pieces, right? So to hear my mother talk about what it felt like to grow up in Louisiana and be restricted from spaces before she could even get there, before she even knew she wanted to enter, because it said whites only. So there's so many levels to this, and I like what this is going to mean for this, a spring futures class on mental health and what mental health care might, in different ways that we may envision that. So that's
That's so interesting that you mentioned the hugs, because I think another, I don't know whether we call it a theme, but several different situations, there were things that might be thought of as the obvious need. One example we used today was about somebody needing to be helped to take their medication. And so the medicine could be seen as the point. But the context that it came up, it was the personal interaction, and it was the hug that was what was significant.
Thank you all so much. This was fantastic. I'm Katina Rogers, the Director of Programs and Administration for the Futures Initiative. And I just wanted to say that ever since Tomo and David proposed this course, I've been thinking a lot about the spaces of the Graduate Center, both the physical spaces that we're in, the one we're in right now, for instance, the huge column in the middle, how the lighting feels. Our poor photographer always tries to get great pictures of everybody, and the fluorescent lights are, not helping to create a space that does feel welcoming. And also the administrative structures that can be very daunting and very prohibitive for people to socially and academically enter this space. Did you all have any thoughts on that? I wonder if that was a topic of conversation in course.
Yeah, it came up regularly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, I think one of the first things you notice when you walk into the graduate store. There's been many times I've been on the phone and I watch people wander in because they're curious about what this is. And then they see the security guard and slowly back out because they quickly realize this is not an open space. And I think it's quite curious how there's nothing really very descriptive. Years later, I still don't know if I'm walking towards the bathroom or the other entrance. So, I mean, but again, it's like the running theme, it's everything in New York is repurposed. So it's how much you want to change something to accommodate what it is today.
Yeah, I think that we spoke to like we're in right now, like windows not to the outside, no light, no greenery, just even the physical environment itself deeply impacting how we felt in the classroom, and then also we had to move we had to move tables around to start our classroom every time to make it a space that was accommodating and productive for intimate conversation. If you're going to be wanting to have emotional and potent conversations, I think a lot goes into creating a space where people feel safe to do so. And so we had to actively create a space for us to feel like we could engage in those types of conversations.
Yeah, I think one of the ideas about how to structure this session, I think David was also thinking about having participants talk about the graduate center space and possibly also rearranging this room as well. I think was that one of the plans?
Always.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that I want to say in response. And I think the most difficult part for us who use the Graduate Center is to keep in mind that at no time do we know where we are. And that's, I mean, it's pretty basic, I think, in how we see ourselves in the world, to know, or to be able to see ourselves in the world, to have some relationship to it. And for most everybody, most of the time in the Graduate Center, that doesn't exist. So not knowing which direction to turn for the bathroom, on the one hand, when it happens to me, I laugh a little bit. I say, oh, I've done it again. And I've been here 31 years, not in this building. And on the other hand, I think it's really a serious challenge to whether this was the right building to make into a graduate center in the first place. It's a whole city block, and there's no way that it could become small spaces without our being lost. The other thing that I've come to learn more about over time is the whiteness of the graduate center, expressed mostly in neutrality. But the neutrality of the Graduate Center to me is not neutral. It's an environment that in a sense presupposes, and I'll use the word whiteness, as who might be comfortable here. And I mean, that's taken for me a period of time to learn, because it's not how I first perceived the Graduate Center. But I think that seeing the quality of the Graduate Center that connects to racism, status, I'm looking for a word about comfort in academic, certain types of academic life and so on. So anyway, I want to add those because I, of course, appreciate your comment.
I kind of want to piggyback on that as well. My work is looking at Black women in higher education, specifically graduate school. And so I've been using this course to flesh those ideas out, specifically around how anti-care is almost inevitable for Black and brown people in this space. I think something that Dr. Chapin was bringing up kind of grounds itself in Sarah Ahmed's words around phenomenology of whiteness and how these spaces are made and are constructed under that, and how the neutrality that he was speaking of is not neutral, it's just white. And also thinking and not only just space, but like walking into a space and seeing who is there and who is doing the speaking, who is the ones who are getting the grants, who are the ones who are getting the funding. So thinking about that as well, and thinking of the Graduate Center as a whole. I've talked to many students in this building, and knowing those who are avoiding certain spaces or avoiding even hallways in this building it's very real.
I wanted to comment on Roosevelt Island and the ironies of Roosevelt Island. And I guess I want to raise up questions about the ironies of places and care. So how segregated spaces then become places of care. I don't know if you know Nora Gross's work, but Nora Gross has written on Martha's Vineyard in the late 1800s, where they were passing a gene for deafness, and 1 in 4 people was deaf, so everybody signed. And so deafness wasn't a disability, it was a handicap, but it didn't kind of keep you from engaging in love relationships or child relationships or education, because the context accommodated. And she did the same work at Roosevelt Island when it became so accessible around wheelchairs. And so there's just something interesting. And then that took me to thinking, some of us got invited to bear witness at a detention camp in Texas, and Andrea was in Urban Ed and she went to Dilthey, and it's filled with mothers and children, and more horrific, I think, than we even know. But she said that the women and children created these circles of care. And they would have rituals, and they all made hats together. And they had an expression, si una sale, todos salen, si una queda, todos quedan. If one leaves, we all leave. If one stays, we all stay. And so I then thought about care as desire, that even in hell, and under incredibly oppressive circumstances, people craft ways to build communities of healing, so that the spikes on inclusion and exclusion is one lens, and then what's happening even inside deeply excluded spaces is, there's something gorgeous about how irrepressible the desire is, and yet how often it's denied. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your panel, it was great. So this discussion actually reminds me of a course that I took last semester with Professor Kennard and a couple of my classmates, Kashin went including Ginger Ed. And the professor did something that was really remarkable and very simple in the class. And she tasked each of us, and herself included, with knowing everyone's name. And I thought how remarkable that was, that sometimes caring can be as simple as knowing someone's name. So at the beginning of each class, we all had to go around and know everyone's name. So it wasn't just about knowing the professor's name and her qualifications and her degree and her interests. It was also about knowing what is the person to my left and to my right's name, and everyone else's name as well. And when I teach a class that I teach at Brooklyn College, I really try to duplicate that same process. And I was like, this is really hard. There's 30 students in here, and each day I gotta make sure I get their names right, but not only get them right, but not botch it up and pronounce it correctly as well. But I felt like this was something that I needed to do. And when inside of my classes, I had a student come up to me and she said, Professor Oya, I was like, first of all, she's a Dashima, not a professor. She said, it was really nice that you took the time to know everyone's name. So when people raised their hand, I would say, Nikita, what do you think about that? Afalolo, what do you think about this? It was their actual names. It wasn't just what do you have to say? So that when other students would talk with each other, everyone knew each other's name. And I thought that was such a simple, small thing to do, is just to know the names of your students, so that the students don't just know the name of the professor. So a small element of care.
I think that's a beautiful example that just allows me to say that Shania this morning was speaking about, she was using the word scale, because sometimes I think we start to think about this world that we all want to live in, that's caring and full of kindness, but we're so far away from it, we can't imagine that it would ever be real. And her comment was that we have to act now at the local scale. And that's a great example, I think, of finding a way right at the local scale to act the way we want the larger world to act, so that we don't put off forever not getting to that world.
Go back.
One more.
I think we're getting really close to the end of this session, but one more.
Hi everybody. So I just wanted to offer to the room, like, if like any thoughts around like caring actually being like the absence of caring, especially in this like era where we talk about self-care a lot more than I think has been talked about in the past, and like capacity being like a real thing, right? And we all have a cap, and you know, for the empaths in the room, sometimes you care so much you can rip yourself to shreds, and so knowing when to scale back, but also like, you know, I don't want to go too deep into it, like you said, Celeste, but like, you know, you bring ethics into, well, I think ethics is inherently part of it, but being explicit about like ethics around it, you know, like, I'm gonna go there, but like, it's like the idea of death, right? And like, the way different people look at it, like culturally, even through like academic lenses, I mean, that's still a culture in a sense. So like, you know, what did that person do? Somebody could not care so much based on what you did, and what led you to being murdered or, you know, dying, you know, different things about that. So I just wanted to like kind of offer that to the room and like, you know, open the space up to that concept, because everybody's kind of spoken on a lot of other things, so just trying to stretch it.
Wow. Yeah.
I wish you would have been in our seminar.
Okay, so I think we're going to switch over to our next panel.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. The next panel, our course is called Mind the Gap, the Future of Work, and we're going to hear from the instructor Ann Kushner and a student in that session whose name is Tyson Himes. So the future of work, you know, kind of introduces us to imagine, you know, what is this whole idea of, you know, flowing blockchain, like driverless cars, like, and, you know, the rumor of, you know, your job gonna be replaced very soon, right? How do we deal with all these different situations? And we're gonna hear more from Ann and Tyson in a minute.
Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks very much to the Futures Initiative and Kath and Katina for putting this together. So the topic of this session, of this whole session, really is right up our alley. The title of Who's Included, Restructuring Our Work and Our World. That's really what we've been talking about all semester. So that's really consistent with our theme. In fact, it is our theme. I'm going to talk a bit before I hand you over to Tyson, who's one of our seminar participants. We had a third one, but she's sick. But we do have 3 other seminar members in the audience. So shout out to all of you. Thanks for coming. And if you guys want to chime in, feel free. So I'm going to talk about the goals of the course, how it was structured, some of the tactics we've used, what we've gotten out of it before I hand you over to Tyson. So first, sort of the inspiration or the origin story, if you will. So I took a really long detour to becoming a professor. I took a 40-year-long detour from the time I finished my PhD and thought I wanted to be a professor till the time I actually became a professor. And during those 40 years, I really had almost nothing to do with academics. I was really in media and tech, mostly in the private sector. But then I became Dean of Macaulay Honors College, joined CUNY, spent 10 years in higher ed administration, and then worked in the CUNY central office for a while as an advisor to the chancellor. And now, wow, I'm a professor. So, first I became a professor, and then I had to decide what was it I was going to teach now that I was a professor. My PhD is in English literature. My dissertation was on orphans in Victorian literature. Dickens, the Brontes, George Eliot, still my favorite reading matter. But I really wasn't going to teach English literature again. And in fact, I really am not attached to any particular department other than being a faculty fellow in the Futures Initiative. And that's always the first question people ask me, what department are you in? And I really feel a bit rootless or minister without portfolio because I can't properly answer that question, which tells you something about how academics is structured. Not what are you interested in, but what department are you in? So what was I going to teach? Well, I've been in higher ed for the last dozen years, and so the course I came up with was a course called Rethinking Higher Education for the Knowledge Economy. But I found myself a little bit restless as I taught a course about higher education, a bit, I won't call it navel gazing, but it sort of felt, I sort of felt stale myself. And so I wanted to widen the aperture because at the end of the day, as much as I love universities, the question isn't what happens to universities, but what happens to the people whom universities are supposed to serve. So I decided that what I would focus on would be the future of work. What I really wanted to accomplish, I realized, was I wanted to learn. I wanted to be stretched in a way I hadn't been stretched before. Now, I already told you I have a PhD in English, so I'm not a labor market specialist, I'm not an economist, I'm not a political scientist, I'm not any of the things that you would think I should be to teach the future of work. But I'm kind of a futurist and someone who has moved between disciplines, and so I set about the task of becoming a student of the future of work. The course was structured around a couple of big building blocks. We looked at the history of previous technological disruptions to understand what had happened in the past when big changes happened, whether it was steam or electricity or something like that. We looked at some of the ethical issues around technology, things like algorithmic bias. And then we looked at the big trends that are shaping the future of work: globalization, demographics, technology itself. And then finally, the last part of the course has been about the impact of all of those things on education, with a focus on post-secondary education. This was intended to be a policy course, and by definition to be interdisciplinary. And the idea was, now that you've spent the last 10 weeks or so learning about some of the real horrors that could lie ahead, massive unemployment and social unrest, what are you going to do about it? What policies would you recommend that we pursue now to mitigate the worst dangers of that? So that was the structure, and the assignment for the students was really to create their own policy assignment. It's a real honor to be part of the Futures Initiative, and it's really it's a responsibility to think about teaching in new ways. I had meager teaching experience to begin with, so it's not like I had to unlearn a lot of bad habits. But with Professor Kathy as my guide, we began trying to think about how we could structure the course in a way that would be as useful and inspiring as possible. There are no textbooks on the future of work, almost by definition. This is a course that's sort of ripped from the headlines. So instead, we relied on case studies, on articles. If any of you watch the PBS NewsHour, the whole last section of it this entire week is on the future of work. So we were able. It was not hard to find lots of material. And we put a lot of emphasis on presentation. We have what I stole from another professor called lightning rounds, where the students present for 5 minutes every week on something that is related to their particular area that they're going to be focusing on in their policy proposal. Each of the students took a different area of disruption for them to focus on, since I couldn't possibly make up for a lifetime of not being a historian of science, so that the students took that role. And then we had a lot of fun in the last class in a debate where half of the class argued that higher education, traditional higher education, will not be the dominant form of education going forward, while the other class argued that it would. And that was pretty interesting. So looking ahead, I'm actually going to teach this course again in the spring, but I want to do it differently, and the nature of that difference will be dictated in part by the student feedback that I get. We're just about to take a survey, and I've also asked the students to help me think about how to change things. I very much want to take a leaf from Kathy's book and have the students take much more of an active role in developing the syllabus the second time around. So I'm reading as much as I can to figure out exactly how to do that, but I'm following a good path here, so I will figure out how to do that. So it's been, for me, the number one goal was, could I stretch and learn, get my arms around a very different topic from any that I specifically had been involved in before. And I would say, yes, I have been able to accomplish that. And I want to turn you over now to Tyson, who's going to tell you a little bit about the course from his perspective.
Hi, I'm Tyson, and I'm a second-year master's student in the political science department. And I'm in the public policy subfield. And I was kind of attracted to this course because I started thinking about my master's thesis, what I was going to write, and I ended up having a random conversation with somebody at a bar, and they said, "Do you know about blockchain?" And I said, "No, please tell me." She said, "Well, it's actually the technology that powers Bitcoin, but it has all these different applications. That can be used in all facets of commerce, public sector, private sector." So I saw this course listed, and I thought this would be a great avenue for me to more fully develop my ideas about blockchain and just learn a lot about the future of work, also by looking to the past and what's happened in the past and what we can learn from. And I just want to stress some aspects of the class that I thought are really great. One is that it's very interdisciplinary. There's a lot of different people from different disciplines in the class, which I really enjoy. I'm a public policy person. You've got somebody from City Hall here. We have somebody from who's the New York City government. There's
we have the UN.
UN, planner,
teachers,
all sorts of different kind of people in one place talking about the future of work, which is a great way to bring together a lot of different perspectives, some surprising perspectives. It's very discussion heavy, so there's a lot of discussion between members of the class, along with the professor as well. It's very open to new ideas, of course, because it's the future of work, so it's obviously not well-defined or well-trod. So it's a very creative outlet, I think, for new ideas. And the coursework is also very interesting because, as the professor said, there is no textbook on the future of work, so it is really an interesting conglomeration of articles and books, new thinking, new articles, breaking news, a whole host of things that can inform how we think about the future of work. There is also an avenue to address issues that will affect the future of work by looking to the past. So we can learn from the past, project into the future, which I think was also a great aspect of the class. And one last point that I want to stress is the digital environment. So there is a digital environment that is hosted by the Futures Initiative. And at the beginning of the class, we all registered for an account, and then we were immediately able to post blog posts and comment on each other's blog posts about our lightning round ideas that we have throughout the course of the semester. And so this encouraged a really great digital sort of communication environment that I think really accented the class overall. And I think you're seeing that more and more with higher ed as we move into the future, are these digital platforms where people can correspond with each other. And that's kind of how I've been threading my ideas about blockchain together throughout the course. And it's kind of grown over time. And for those of you that don't know, blockchain is essentially a decentralized, immutable ledger. So basically, it's secure, believe it or not, but you can view transactions in a decentralized way. My example I always go to is, let's say I trade somebody a gallon of olive oil for a goat. So instead of just writing that transaction down into a book, where you have to give permission to view that, viewing is limited, you could just add that transaction to a blockchain, and everyone can view that transaction if you have the block ID, and you can search for that block. So there's some cryptography that goes on behind the scenes, but essentially it's a public ledger that is secure. And so what are the applications for this? Well, I've been really going through a lot of iterations for applications, and there's just so many, it's kind of hard to pin down. But my idea for my big idea policy paper is to write about the future of workplace safety. So OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, this law was passed in 1970 to require employers to report injuries in the workplace. However, it hasn't been updated for the new digital environment at all. A lot of employers fail to report injuries. Some employers, some of their facilities, they have electronic self-reporting, but other facilities in the same company don't have electronic self-reporting. So it's very confusing for the worker and for regulators to try to figure out what's going on. You don't really have a full picture. So my idea would be to install a node in every company in a given state, let's say Oregon, where the company has their own node in the blockchain, which is just, it's a network, that's how it's powered. All transactions on the network are validated by a network of nodes. So in HR, an employee could self-report an injury, and that could be added to the blockchain. And this would get past the employer not reporting or throwing away that report, etc. And I think added transparency in this process would greatly improve worker safety in the future. And there's a lot of corollaries and clarifications along with that, but I obviously don't have a lot of time, but that is the crux of my idea. And I think a safer workplace is an improvement to the future of work, and that's kind of what I'm hammering home in my big idea policy paper.
Sure. Anybody have any questions, comments, ideas?
I'm happy to start it off again if you
Otherwise we can.
So many questions.
Otherwise, we can hear more from Tyson on his amazing blockchain.
Yes.
Tyson, when you said that OSHA, which was written in 1970, hadn't been updated for the digital environment, did you also mean that digital hazards, workplace hazards, are not included in OSHA? Privacy, security violations? So many of the violations of the world we live in now are digital violations, and so many of our laws, in fact, have not remotely been rewritten to encompass that. Is that true also about labor and OSHA?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, but that's a pretty fascinating question that I can actually pursue in my paper, so thank you.
That's good. The other thing I was thinking about is today there was an article in the New York Times about, yet again, about kids, grad students who graduated living in their parents' basements because they're not prepared for the workforce. And that always makes me mad when the other half isn't presented, and I'm wondering if your class presented this, which is the fact that you can be a highly skilled, highly trained worker right now, but if you have tuition debt, you cannot afford to be a teacher, a social worker, a general practitioner in a rural area, not a prosecutor, a defending attorney on the defense side rather than the prosecutor or the corporate side. Many occupations. Teachers used to make 1% less than the median income in 1990. Now they make 17% less than the median income of workers in America. I mean, there's all kinds of things that aren't about education not preparing you for skilled work. It's about skilled work no longer paying. Coding is another one. Coding is the fastest superannuated profession is programming. The one that you no longer are capable of doing fastest is programming right now. So we tell young people to go into STEM without adding that most STEM workers now are in fact the equivalent of adjunct faculty members, of course, another occupation that is no longer lucrative. I'm just wondering how you looked at that part as well.
We talked about that a lot.
I bet.
I mean, but I guess the underlying question I would ask is how deep is the conversation in higher education about what we should prepare students for? So it's not only that we're preparing them for some jobs that don't pay enough for them to have a living wage, but we don't even have the conversation because somehow it's deemed anti-intellectual. You know, we don't want to. You know, I would have conversation after conversation with higher ed administrators who would say, with some degree of piety, we don't prepare students for the first job. We prepare students for the 10th job. But there is a great deal of evidence that if you don't get a good first job, you are going to be underemployed for the next 5 to 10 years. There's real data on this particular subject. So to say that we don't prepare students for the first job, I think is malpractice. So I think there's a lot of issues relating to what the relationship between education, learning, trade, preparation, apprenticeships, a whole new set of sometimes people talk about it in terms of new on-ramps and new off-ramps. We had 3 guest speakers in the class, by the way. We had Andy Stern, who used to run one of the largest unions in the country, talking about universal basic income and whether that was a solution for the future. We had Ryan Craig talking about new forms of education to complete what he calls last mile training, that is the gap between a higher ed degree and getting that job. And then we had Rob Zenz from a firm called MC, right? MC, which actually now it's part of Strata. That's one of the best data science companies looking at, I'll give you an example of one of their incredible reports that just came out, which is about what are the skills that you come out with in higher education? How do we describe it in higher education? And then how does the marketplace describe them? And how do we map one to the other so that as students are interviewing for jobs or preparing resumes or having interviews or something like that, we don't have a complete disconnect, which is what we have now. We think about liberal arts skills as communication and problem solving and critical thinking. That's not the language of the marketplace. So anyway, we had 3 great guest speakers who brought us a good perspective on particularly that question.
2 thoughts come to mind for me in this, if I were a student in your class, and I love that you admitted that you looked forward to being a student of the very class that you intend to teach. I totally identify with that, and I'm glad there's a space where we can do that and let it evolve and develop. But I'm thinking about the ethical and moral dilemmas that people who are involved in the siphoning of manual labor type jobs, digitizing them and so forth. If you consider that as one question. And then secondly, something that's coming to mind is the representation of this futuristic work environment in children's literature. I have a 9-year-old son, and we recently finished reading a book about robots, the life of a robot. This one awkward robot that had like thought and emotions and so forth, but it was in this world where robots did most things that humans used to do, including learning about the patterns of sheep and cow out on pasture and things. And so it facilitated conversations with my son that I would have never expected having that kind of fit with your class here. So it'd be nice if you could comment on those two things.
We talked about those interesting things all the time, didn't we, Tyson?
Not the children's literature one.
No, we missed that one. Right. But yeah, those are exactly the kinds of issues that we talked about. A lot of jobs that many of us would consider bad jobs will be eliminated. Well, that's okay, maybe. What happens to those people? And so should we mourn the loss of those jobs? There was an article just a couple of days ago, Times and Wall Street Journal, about the mechanization on farms and how the massive number of jobs that migrant workers used to do are going to be, or many of those are going to be eliminated. Now, there you have a convergence of all kinds of issues, of manual labor being eliminated, immigration issues, as well as that sort of hollowing out of the whole range of jobs that used to be sort of entry level, get your foot in the door sort of jobs. So, I personally can't imagine wanting to elect anybody to office who doesn't think about these issues in a complex way, and complex does not mean let's bring back the coal mining jobs. I mean, how do we, this is going to be an issue that is going to affect, everybody in this room, or their children or grandchildren, and it will affect higher education as well. And we are not known as a sector that moves with great rapidity. So perhaps it's time for us to be thinking about how to get ready for this new world.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm very interested in the class, and I wish I could be in your class. And
the next semester.
And I have a question about the relationship between the higher education and then employers in the future, especially in knowledge economy. Because in the relationship between the higher education and employers is more like a hierarchical, and then higher education institutions losing our power, how we can define what is the work skills and so on, competencies like that. So I just wonder what kind of discussion you have about the relationship between higher education and employers in the future, especially within the context of knowledge economy.
Well, we've had it really good because a college diploma became sort of the proxy for, middle class and up jobs. But we are going to lose that advantage because it's a very blunt instrument, right? A college degree, you've got a diploma, you're okay. As technology enables us to learn more and more about skills that are necessary to do specific jobs, employers will find very efficient ways to figure out, if I need somebody to do this, how do I affirm that they can do this other than with a college degree, other than looking for a diploma? So I think we had a home field advantage that is beginning to shrink. More and more employers are taking college degree required off their job descriptions. That's happening more and more. And so I think it's been ours to lose. And since I personally would like to see universities thrive, I think I think you ask a really important question, which is how are we going to assure employers that we are still the best game in town?
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Murray. I'm a PhD candidate in the Developmental Psychology program and the Embedded Fellow for the Futures Initiative course Disability, Culture, and Society, which was co-taught by Professors Julia Millet-Rodas and Joseph Strauss, sitting over here. So I'm going to be doing a brief presentation about their course and also a brief overview of disability studies at CUNY. And then I'll be introducing Jennifer Roederer, who is a student in the course and a performer for the Metropolitan Opera, who will be performing a piece from the opera Elektra. So I'm really excited about that. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So this image is, let me hide this part. Hold on just one second. Can you hear it? Okay. So this image is a series of cutouts created by Matisse 10 years after surgery left him disabled and homebound. And cutouts were a primary medium for him from 1941 until his death in 1954. And I chose this image because Julia chose to feature it on their course website. I didn't really know the history of this image until I looked it up. And I
Clever of you to figure it out.
I know. I knew there was a reason you put it on there. And I think it also kind of helps to open a dialogue about what disability studies is. So I'm going to read your excellent course description because I think it gives a really good overview of disability studies and the humanities. Like the fictions of gender and race, disability is a cultural and social formation that sorts bodies and minds into desirable, normal, and undesirable, abnormal, or sick categories. Regimes of representation in literature, art, music, theater, film, and popular culture, the ways that bodies and minds constructed as disabled are depicted, both reflect and shape cultural understandings of normal, non-conforming identities and extraordinary bodies, affecting the lived experience of people understood as disabled, often in negative ways. Drawing on examples from the arts and popular culture, this course interrogates many ways that disability identity has been confined to rigid and unproductive social, political, and aesthetic categories. It also explores a significant counter-tradition in which disability is seen as an important artistic resource and a desirable way of being in the world. And so once you start to realize how rich the field of disability studies is, it's really easy to get carried away. So Julia and Joe put together an amazing, ambitious syllabus for their course that could probably fill 2 or 3 semesters of teaching. So this included a film series and a speaker series, all of which were co-sponsored by the Futures Initiative, the CUNY Graduate Center Program in Music, and the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And so this is a picture of the mural in the home of Matisse, just for reference of the size, that's now in MoMA's permanent collection. And these are a few presentation stills from the speaker series. So the first is from Julia Roederer's new book, Autistic Disturbances. And let's see, Joe's book, Broken Beauty, Musical Modernism and the Representation of Disability, which is a really great presentation that included a lot of multimedia explanation of how disability is portrayed through music, visual, audio, very nice, accessible presentation. Authoring Autism by Melanie Yurgau. And so these were just a few of the speakers. There were 5 other speakers throughout the semester. You can learn more on the Futures Initiative website. But for the course, the weekly class topics included narrative, representation, autism, madness, blindness, deafness, idiocy, academia and pedagogy, and intersections of race, gender and sexuality, and violence. They have encouraged students to submit creative works in the place of traditional response papers, as a way of acknowledging different ways of learning. So these have included audio responses, mixed media, diagrams, and lesson plans, which I thought was a really great way to respond to a reading. So yeah, anyone who's teaching in the humanities should definitely check out their syllabus for ideas if you want to incorporate disability studies into your own course. And I want to also say that I've known Julie and Joe for the last about 4 years through the CUNY Disability Scholars Group. So I'm going to make a shameless plug for our group because we've been putting a lot of work into trying to connect people throughout CUNY that are doing work in disability studies. And so we met for the first time in spring of 2015. And we've managed to kind of connect people through unpaid labor, and I care for making this topic something that can bring people together throughout CUNY. And we do this primarily through a website with a directory and a showcase of scholarly work of our members. We have events, a listserv, and meetings that are held at the School of Professional Studies. So CUNY SPS, the connection is that they have the first standalone disability master's program of its kind. The program merges theory and practice in a way that centers the direct experience of individuals with disabilities. So this means that considerations for accessibility are always front and center. And the MA program, led by Professor Mariette Bates, has been a leader at CUNY for creating accessible online and hybrid courses that are available to people around the world. So back in 2015, when I met Julie and Joe, I wasn't really sure what disability studies even was. I hadn't heard about it, but I was doing research about mobility disabilities, and as someone with an invisible disability who doesn't look like I have any kind of disability, I was trying to figure out my own positionality, so I was trying to get a lot of different perspectives. And so I definitely learned a lot in the last 4 years. And I think disability studies, even though it's primarily been in the humanities, it really should be in most academic fields, especially psychology and social science. But that's not really how it is right now. But I think that's starting to change. And there are more and more disability studies courses and programs throughout the country. So I'll make one last shameless plug. SBS recently launched a new open access journal, which I helped to design and get off the ground. And it's accepting submissions now, so please check out the website. And that's really all I have. Check out the course on the Futures Initiative website. Check out CUNY Disability Scholars. And without further ado, I want to introduce Jennifer Roederer, who's going to give us a little bit of background on the piece she's going to be performing. And will be accompanied by Albin Konopka. Did I say that right? Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes on this. On the operatic madwoman. It has a long history in opera, and probably famously, a lot of you know the Queen of the Night in The Magic Flute. She has a very high role. She is the prospective mother-in-law from hell, and her vocal fireworks bespeak her hysteria and rage. There's also Lucia di Lammermoor, which is a very sexualized character. Her madness stems from the consummation of an unwanted marriage. Wagner created the character of Ortrud in Lohengrin. She did not appear in the original Teutonic myth, but the composer felt the opera needed a female villain. And Ortrud's rage against Elsa is portrayed in her vocal line, which pushes the voice to its outer limits. This operatic treatment of the stigmatized female was the first of many in the German operatic repertoire that changed the vocal characterization from florid histrionics to sweeping, spiky, and roles requiring almost superhuman amplitude. Elektra is a one-act opera in German by Richard Strauss, based on a libretto by Hugo von Hofmannsthal, adapted from his 1903 play. The opera premiered in January 1909. We've heard the term Electra complex, which is Jung's sort of feminine counterpart to the Oedipus complex. It's the girl's desire to destroy her mother to gain the affection of her father. Electra is a mythical character who had these feelings against her mother. A Greek mythology appeared in the 5th century BCE tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides. In my project for this wonderful class taught by Professor Strauss and Professor Rodas, I focus a great deal on Electra and the portrayal of Electra, her mother Clytemnestra, and her sister Chrysothemis, as well as the serving maids who framed the madness of these women. Who's that? I'm not sure which one that is. Strauss uses a massive orchestra. It's storied and wide-ranging vocal lines, dissonant harmonies, and instrumental painting to develop madness. Alvin, it might sound like he's playing wrong notes, but he's not. That's actually in the orchestra. And you know, one can create an over-the-top, mugging sort of cartoon of these characters. So it is up to the performer to draw upon inner turmoil and experience whether these are real things that have happened or imaginary things that you can come up with. The role of Clytemnestra is one of my dream roles. I have never performed it, unfortunately, yet, but I have understudied the role at Virginia Opera and performed with the orchestra for the other singer. And I've also performed the maidservant, couple of the different maidservants in Elektra with some great, at some like major opera houses with some great Elektras and great Clytemnestras. One of the women I worked with was Leonie Riesenig, who is the one woman to sing all three of these Elektra heroines, if you want to call them heroines. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of the, I wanted to say the first Clytemnestra, Ernestine Schumann-Heink, the creator of the role, said about their process of creating these characters. We were a set of mad women, truly we were, and the music itself is maddening. So I'm just going to give you a quick, this is the Dream aria. It's not much of an aria, it's sort of like the opera is through composed. It's about an hour and a half long with no intermission, the opera. But this, in this scene, you can really hear Clytemnestra's decay and paranoia and terror in the bizarre harmonies and the nightmarish sound world that Strauss has created. Clytemnestra has terrifying dreams that she cannot stop, and she hopes that Elektra knows of a cure, because even though Elektra is very much shunned by the family, she is seen as this sort of all-knowing character. And so this is the translation, roughly. Clytemnestra says, I have no good nights. Do you know a remedy against dreaming? Elektra says, you dream, mother? Elektra says, Clytemnestra says, those who grow old dream, but dreams can be banished. There are rights for these things. That is why I'm so laden with these jewels. Each one has a power, but we need to know how to use the power best. If you were kind, Elektra, you could counsel me on this. And Elektra says, I, mother? Yes, you, because you are wise. In your head all is strong. You can tell me. What is a word but a breath? And yet between night and day, I lie sleepless with open eyes. Something creeps over me on my bed. It's not a word. It's not a pain. It doesn't press on me. It doesn't choke me. It is nothing, not even a goblin. And yet it is so horrible that every limb cries out for death. And I'm not even sick. You see me. Do I look like I'm sick? Can one rot like this, like a living corpse? Can one crumble without sickness while awake, like garments eaten by moths? Then I sleep and dream until my very marrow seems to freeze. I stagger up awake, and the hourglass isn't even half gone. And what is that grinning in the curtains? Is it not the pale morning? No. The torch burns low with a ghostly flame, then flickers bright like a living thing with eyes that watch me. These dreams must come to an end. From wherever they come, this demon must leave if the right blood is spilled. Elektra cajoles her and plays with her and agrees that a sacrifice must be made. However, that sacrifice is going to be Clytemnestra. No, we're going to just go for it.
Ich habe keine guten Nächte. Weißt du kein Mittel gegen Träume? Wer älter wird, der träumt. Allein, es lässt sich vertreiben. Es gibt Bräuche, es muss für alles richtige Bräuche geben. Darum bin ich so behängt mit Steinen, denn es wohnt in jedem ganz sicher eine Kraft. Man muss nur wissen, wie man sie nützen kann. Wenn du nur wolltest, du könntest etwas sagen, was mir nützt. Ja, du, denn du bist klug. In deinem Kopf ist alles stark. Du könntest vieles sagen, was mir nützt. Wenn auch ein Wort nichts weiter ist, was ist denn ein Hauch? Und doch Krieg zwischen Tag und Nacht, wenn ich mit offenen Augen lieg, ein etwas hinüber mich. Es ist kein Wort, es ist kein Schmerz, es drückt mich nicht, es führt mich nicht. Nichts ist es, nicht einmal ein Alp. Und dennoch, es ist so fürchterlich, dass meine Seele sich wünscht, erhängt zu sein. Lied in mir schreit nach dem Tod, und dabei lebe ich und bin nicht einmal krank. Du siehst mich doch, seh ich wie eine Kranke. Kann man denn vergehen leben wie ein faules Aas? Kann man zerfallen, wenn man gar nicht krank ist? Zerfallen wachen Sinnes wie ein Kleid, zerfressen von den Motten. Schlaf ich und träume, dass sich mir das morgende Knochen lässt und taune wieder auf. ist.
How the hell did you do that?
Does anyone have any reactions or questions? Thank you so much. That was incredible.
What does that do? What does that do as a singer? You're just sort of standing in this horrible room and just gave us a talk, and you helped me understand something about madness, an opera that I've never understood before, and you went from that to that. I don't even understand what that, it's almost like, I don't even have a word for what that is. If disability is one thing we define as being whether there's some stupid center, then this is some extraordinary other, I don't know if you can right now, I mean, after that, but to talk about as a performer, what that is and what that takes, it's unbelievable.
It is drawing on emotions that everybody has. And when you get a role like this, or you get a piece like this that you have to learn, you put yourself in there as I mean, I'm a singer, but equally I'm an actor, so I just go with it, and I draw on all kinds of experiences, you know, personal experiences, family relationships come in very handy with a lot of the roles that I portray, and observation of other people. And interestingly enough, I've even, you know, coming here has improved my performing, because in this class, we're using all sorts of texts, and you know, there's a couple of texts, Julia, that you suggested that I use that we had to talk about airless spaces. I can't ever say her first name. Shulamith Firestone, and the funny farm one. Sorry, the other way. Anyway, some you know, sort of firsthand accounts of people's experiences with their own mental illnesses has brought an even greater dimension. I mean, I've sort of tried to not be a cartoon character when I sing, and get the audience's sympathy, because we all have some of this in us. But I feel like now to really go for these you know, first person narratives has really informed my performance now. So it's really a treasure, you know, besides all the things I'm learning, to be able to apply it to my own performing. So, yeah, thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll say a couple of quick things. One is, there are a lot of really talented graduate students here at the Graduate Center. That was really quite spectacular. The other thing I wanted to say is that one of the pleasures of teaching this class was we had students in the class from a lot of different disciplines, especially English literature and music and women's studies and psychology, and the interaction was really very, very productive. One of the themes of the class was representations of disability, the ways in which disability is represented in literature and in film, but also in music. And so some of what Jennifer is doing is in this performance is embodying familiar tropes around madness. So when people think of, you know, well, what does it mean to be, quote, mentally ill? What does it mean to be mad, which is the more traditional term? You know, how does one enact that? How does one represent it? How does one make madness visible? You know, madness is something presumably up here. How do you make madness palpable and visible, in this case audible, to people? And one way is you tie into a long history of representations of madness. So some of what Jennifer is doing, she's drawing on her personal experiences, as she said, but she's also drawing on a long history of ways of making madness visible.
Julia, do you want to say anything?
I would, although there's a question over there about
Thank you. That was great. So I've, like, I don't know, like, you're not a student here, out in Canoka, sorry. It ties into Jennifer, so I'm gonna ask it. If they cut me off, they cut me off. Have you ever played a piece like that before? Like, I don't know if this is the right word, so please forgive me, but it seemed very like chaotic in a sense. Okay, cool. So
yeah, it's really it's a difficult piece. It's, you know, and of course, as you mentioned, it's for a 1,000-piece orchestra. You know, so not all the parts can be represented, and you have to. There is a reduction that I play from, but I have to go back and listen to the instruments because you know, the original orchestrations to figure out what needs to be highlighted because it's not clear in the music. You know, there's I can't play the trumpet line. I can't sustain anything, so I do the best I can to bring that line out. But yeah, it's hard to read too. I mean, I have to just keep playing it over and over again to get used to the vocabulary because there's sharps and flats going on. Whereas most music, you have a key signature, and you know, occasionally it's accidental here and that. This is like every note has one. And then the other thing I was talking to Jen about this. It's the destruction of the bar line. It's the trying to liberate music from being metered. You know, so there's all these rhythms counter rhythms that are purposely in conflict, and they go over the bar line. And so I don't know if you can see me. I'm sitting there like 1, 2. It's very difficult that way. But yes, it's. And of course, I've got to keep my eye on her in the line, make sure that we're syncing up with the tempo changes, which there are quite a few as well.
Have you ever done this before, the two of you?
Oh, yeah. We happen to live together.
Oh,
Yes, thank you. Okay, so does someone else have a question?
I want to say a very, very quick thing, which is one of the ways that music can represent madness is just the ways you were talking about, by doing away with some of the conventional musical things that keep music in an orderly fashion. So music has bar lines, and music is typically in a key. Well, this piece shatters the bar line in various ways. It's very hard to keep like a regular count, and this music is constantly thwarting any sense of a key. You think you're arriving in some musical destination, and immediately that security is taken away from you, and those are some of the ways in which the composer represents madness musically.
So mine isn't a question, it's a thank you to your course and to your introduction and to your performance, because 100 years ago I did work in disability studies and with Adrienne Ash, who's an amazing colleague. And we're in a field that has so pathologized and created the hierarchies that there was something quite beautiful about you embodying and singing and performing, and even the images of your students' work in this room that looks like a padded cell, right? and me thinking, did Kathy tell everybody on the hall, like, we're gonna be doing, like, that it was so gorgeously disruptive at a moment in time where we're all feeling a little mad. And I live in New Jersey, and there's a boarded up institution near me, and I go to it a lot, like, to be with the ghosts of the women who I assume are still hanging out, and sometimes I sing to them, but not like you. But you also rendered madness as like a resource of affect, of knowledge, of wisdom, of connection. And I think that's really useful right now for us to understand all the rhythms of both madness and music, maybe, and the Academy, hopefully. Hopefully the Academy is worthy to be in the same conversation as madness and music, to dare to make connections across at times where we're all feeling a little decentered. So really just gorgeous. Thank you all.
I did want to say just one boring word about the way a course like this serves the mission of the Futures Initiative, which is, this is not only all about what happens in the classroom,
I think that Jennifer's performance is this living embodiment of the fact that theory extends itself outward into the world in all of these really meaningful ways. So for a performer to understand that her performance of madness is going out into an audience, that the audience is taking that home, that a compassionate performance is an act of disability justice. For the drawings that we did in our classes, the response papers, to be a model for how disability studies might happen in an undergraduate classroom, in a community center, in a public-facing organization. The fact that disability studies is happening in film, it doesn't take away from the fact that the theory is real and necessary, that there's work happening in the classroom with the 15 of us in there unpacking this stuff and hashing it out and diving deep into this very intellectually demanding material. But it means that it's not just that. It is the whole outward life of disability studies and disability activism that connects with every part of the world. So.
How are we doing on time? Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the next and final session, which is featuring the Futures Initiative Fellows.
Thank you so much.
When we were building the schedule, I did not think about the fact that I was going to have to speak after an opera performance. I do not recommend it. It feels very prosaic, literally. And I am just filled with so much gratitude. Jennifer has stepped into the hallway now, but I love these end of semester, end of year symposia so much because I don't get to see what happens in the classroom on a week-to-week basis. I'm Katina Rogers. I'm Director of Programs and Administration for the Futures Initiative. And so I've helped to plan a lot of what goes into the structure of these courses, but I don't get to see what happens there. And I learned so much from hearing from you all and from the ways that these connect. I loved the comment about the airless room and how that performance was a way to pierce that and to bring emotion and connection, which I think really kind of brings us back full circle to the beginning of the day and thinking about spaces of care and welcome. The question of who is included in higher education is something that we've been addressing directly and indirectly through all of the sessions today, and it's something that we think about through the Futures Initiative's mission in everything that we do, in all of the programming that we do, but also in the ways that we structure our own work. And so that's something we wanted to experiment a little bit today and pull back the curtain on some of the ways that we work together. One part of my role involves managing the Futures Initiative's fellowship program. We have a team of 7 graduate fellows who are absolutely incredible. You've got to meet some of them through the course of today's session. They plan events like this one, they develop undergraduate programming, they plan communications and web development strategies. They really run the Futures Initiative. So we have weekly 2-hour meetings, which should be it should be a chore. Nobody likes weekly 2-hour meetings. That's like a lot of meetings. But they have become a source of joy and of sustenance for our group. Often literal sustenance, because we have a couple of people who happen to be bakers and who have become very competitive in their bringing of delicious baked goods to our meetings. And as a measure of this sense of joy and connection that we have with one another through these meetings, I tried to cancel a meeting the week of Thanksgiving, and everybody looked at me like they were being punished for something, and decided not to cancel that meeting and instead to meet together and to peer review one another's teaching statements, CVs, resumes, just to help one another in the various stages of their own processes and goals. So these meetings are a delight, in part because we have amazing people and amazing people who bring cake, and in part because they're a way for us to enact the program's principles every week, even though nobody else gets to see it most of the time. Every person's voice matters at these meetings, and we create as many opportunities as we can to build trust and to share vulnerability. And that doesn't happen by accident, but through structure. And that's why attending to the details of structure and administration, things that are often thought of as boring and as drudgery, are actually crucial to bringing about equity and even joy in higher education. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce you to two of our fellows, Christina Katapotis, who is a doctoral student in English, and Suchi Tu, who you've met already today, who's a doctoral candidate in sociology, who are going to show you a little bit of what this looks like and talk more about why it matters.
Okay.
Yeah, you can start right now. Try to figure out.
Thank you so much for everything. That is a literally very hard act to follow. So one thing that we do to include everyone in our meetings is we do these collaborative agendas. And how that looks is, well, I should start by saying that we also rotate who runs the meeting. So most of our meetings, because most of our group is students, most of our meetings are run by students. And so every week a new person enters the rotation, sends out an agenda, a Google Doc before we meet. And then in these Google Docs, they're often blank. We have some key documents and key links, but they're usually blank. And then we spend 5 minutes at the beginning of every meeting brainstorming the top things that we want to talk about. And we just take 5 minutes or less often, and we write down on a flashcard the top 3 things that we want to talk about. And because we have hands in many different things, one person runs the newsletter, another person's doing the undergraduate leadership fellows, another person is a research assistant, another person is web development and design. We're doing such different things that none of us has a hand in everything. And so what I really like about this is nothing gets left out, nothing gets forgotten. And it also partially eases my anxiety about forgetting things, and I love lists. And so what we do is we have these 3 things, we go around and share, and we reorganize our agenda and our priorities based on what we most want to talk about. So the top thing gets the most votes, essentially. And then we restructure what we address first based on what our pressing needs are.
Yeah, so this is an example of our December 4th meeting, so this Tuesday's meeting. So usually we start by seeing something kind of blank. This is actually a less than usual thing. We usually start by like plain blank things, and then every fellow will write the 3 things they have on their mind, right? And we go around the room and record like what are the things on people's mind, and then you will see something more like this. So you can see on this Tuesday's meeting, a lot of us want to talk about website, right? 7 of us want to talk about this. Some of us want to talk about last meeting of the semester, and some of us want to talk more about the incoming end of year wrap-up and spring goals. So we kind of prioritize the goals centering on everyone's needs, and we don't necessarily know what other people have on mind. Like for this week, it's quite straightforward because we know there's an event coming up on Thursday. Everyone wants to talk a little bit about that. But on other weeks, maybe we don't have a more like emergent event, so we kind of know what other people are working on, and then we can center the agenda based on everyone's needs. And as Christina just mentioned, that's really important for us to feel really included. So we also rotate who's gonna lead the meeting, but the most important thing is still like everyone have a say in setting the agenda of today, so everyone feel extremely included. You know, it's not like I'm going to a meeting, it's I'm part of the meeting, right? That's really important for me. And I joined the Futures Initiative this semester, but I started to attend some meeting last year when I got accepted in the program, and I already feel that's very different. I feel very included, and I already feel a part of the bigger family, right? That's very different from most of the other, department meeting or committee meeting that I've ever been on, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, speaking to what CG said, I feel like I'm part of the initiative, in the Futures Initiative. I feel like I am part of pushing the mission forward. I'm part of deciding what the mission is. And I have so much more say in that. And you know, I've been to many different kinds of meetings in my life. And these are the only meetings I've actually been excited to go to where I feel like we have always done something productive. We have always spent our time well. We've always prioritized. Sometimes we end early, but we always end on time. And we really respect people's time. So yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, do you want to look at your thing?
Speaking of time. So this was our pre-Thanksgiving meeting.
Yeah, that's the competitive part. We have 3 people breaking for the group, so that's why we end up having 3 different things on the table.
Some of us are competitive eaters.
Very competitive eaters as well. We have a very large faction for chocolate. So yeah, so this is our vision of like what a collaborative agenda would look like for this event. And so we put the example baked goods. You'll have to wait for the reception, but it's only like 5 minutes away. And then some key documents, like for example, the public Google Doc where we've been taking notes this whole time, and that's a live link. You can go afterwards and see what notes are there, the live stream, live captions, and then that entry ticket that you filled out at the beginning of the event. Wonderful job transcribing by Katina and the Futures Initiative Fellows. We, or Katina rather, not we, but Katina for us organized them according to priority. Raven. Thank you, Raven. And as the meeting is happening, we're live transcriptions, like live Slack chat, planning and making this possible in 2 hours. So we had no idea what you would come up with and what would be up here until now. And that's kind of the wonderful serendipity of every meeting, that no meeting is alike, and we might copy blank agendas, but we don't copy any meeting because they're always different. So do we want to?
Yeah, so we can see a lot of you answer. We ask you what do you think is the present issue in regards to inclusion in the higher education, and we can see 4 of you mention addressing the achievement gap in higher education between white, people of color, and first generation college students, right, going beyond the diversity to encourage more structural change, right? And a lot of you also mentioned a lack of diversity in higher ed curriculum all the way down to individual syllabi, the continued center and uplifting awareness in almost all aspects of education, and how do we get a more underrepresented faculty and students more involved. So really appreciate that you share all these concerns with us, because this is also in line with Futures Initiative's mission, right? This is exactly why we are here having this full symposium. The mission of having all these Futures Initiative courses is trying to address the issue of not having a more inclusive curriculum, not having a more diverse education, and kind of trying to address the achievement gap in every aspect of higher education. Also, some of you mentioned equity, right? The one thing to include students in higher education spaces, and another to equitable integrate their personal experience into the learning process, accessibility and creating safe spaces for students. So I feel like a lot of the courses we discussed today kind of address these issues, especially I was thinking like your course on environmental psychology of care and those courses on disability, culture, and society. Yeah.
Speaking to CG, also reading these, I'm reminded that what I really love about this agenda setting is that there's no shame in not knowing. So when we put something up on the agenda that we don't know about, that we want to learn more about, it's really nice to see that, oh, these other people also think these things too. They also want to hear about that. They also want to be informed. So rather than feeling shame in like not knowing exactly what's happening this week in Haystack, for example, I feel really great about asking, hey, tell me about Haystack. What's happening this week? And so I just love that the way that these are grouped by Raven, you can see that like you're not alone in feeling that these are priorities, right? That these are things that need to be included, and no one is also left out. every single thing gets listed. And we don't have time today to go over all of them, but I'm really glad that you participated, and we'll definitely be using these and talking about them in our meetings going forward as a survey of the room. Should we ask for questions?
Yeah.
This will all be
questions?
made, this is all public as well.
This is all
Yeah,
public.
this is also.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Thoughts, reflections on the whole day?
Hey, my name is Raven, and I'm a recent fellow with the Futures Initiative team, and I've just had a few months of weekly meetings. And one thing I really wanted to share with you all is the usually half an hour to 40 minutes we take during every meeting to select a theme, to really touch base on where we're all at in our graduate studies. And these topics can vary from how is your dissertation project going, or how are you self-caring for yourself on campus? And everyone will take usually on a timer around 2 to 5 minutes each to kind of share and check in. And for me personally, it's been a wonderful experience during my first semester of graduate studies to gain from the wisdom and the experience that the other fellows have had as a master's student, and kind of navigating what to expect in the future. It's a really nice point to connect with each other, and I was wondering if you wanted to share a little bit more about that kind of dynamic that goes on in the weekly meetings.
Yeah, so I created a hashtag called Tuesdays Together, specifically because of that, because we are looking forward to our Tuesday meeting when, after we discuss all the business within the Futures Initiative, we focus a little bit more on, personal growth and professional growth. And I think we have been sharing themes centering on like time management techniques, how to select a dissertation committee, right? How to do self-care, how to choose career paths, and so much more. And also the other thing I think we really care about is the Futures Initiative advocate for student-centered pedagogies a lot. And I think we're kind of embodying that mission as well. I mean, we are trying to give everyone a voice and, not saying, okay, this is a meeting, we have one who lead and everyone follows. And I think that's the way we kind of practice what we believe in. We believe the students are not just a participant, they're also the leader in the classroom. That's why we also run our meeting the same way, so we can, kind of embody everything that we believe in.
Yeah, I'll also say I learned a lot from the pedagogy that gets brought into leading these meetings. I learned so much from other people's teaching methods and how they start the meeting and how they finish the meeting, and what they bring to each of them. And I've incorporated some of that pedagogy into my classes. Also, we've started meeting outside for like writing dates to finish the dissertation, and it's a very supportive and encouraging group where I think we all feel heard. We all feel included, and there's a sense of positivity in that meeting rather than feeling like, I've got another meeting. And so I just love that about this opportunity. I feel like it's something that could be incorporated into all meetings, classrooms, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so with that, we are out of time, and I just want to point out that all of those things that we talk about, those are matters of inclusion as well. I mean, I think some of the tacit knowledge around navigating graduate education is one of the big stumbling blocks. So very important reasons why we talk about that each week. Now, I would be delighted if everybody could join us downstairs. We're going to meet in room 3317. Please join us for a glass of wine, for some snacks. I want to say thank you to all of the faculty members, all the students, all of our graduate fellows, Futures Initiative team for helping to make this day possible. And please follow us down to 3317 and toast with us the end of the semester. Thank you all.